Hello and welcome to CPS WebTips. This month, October, we're going to talk about Winshuttle form and workflow development don'ts. My name is Jason King, process architect and manager at CPS. So for years, CPS has been providing WebTip videos containing, best practices and things that you should do as a form and workflow developer. But today I want to talk a little bit more about some of the things that we should not do as developers, the don'ts, if you will. So what we're going to cover today is 5 of my top, don'ts, if you will. So, let's just start off the bat. I'll just kind of go through these things and then I'll demonstrate what I'm talking about within our Evolve environment, Winshuttle Evolve. So first of all, don't put JavaScript code directly in your rules. We should use the JavaScript console to create a function and then call that function from the rules. We'll also talk about how we should not be leaving the rules that we create with the name new rule. Another thing that we should avoid is not naming your groups. We don't want to name groups or leave the groups name something that you're not going to understand later and be able to easily recognize. And I'll show you why. We don't want to leave form name controls, current user controls, buttons, query controls, any of the things that basically are at the top of your form on your process status and process completed views. Those should be read-only. They shouldn't allow for updating or potentially resubmitting a form. And I'll explain and show that a little bit further in a few minutes. And then lastly, don't build spider webs, build workflows. And I'll show you exactly what I mean, which is pretty apt based on the fact that it's almost Halloween. Okay, so I'm going to exit my presentation right now, and I'm going to jump into our Winshuttle Evolve environment. And these things apply to Foundation just as much as they would Evolve, but I figure give some people who haven't seen Evolve a sneak peek into that. So to start with, let's not be putting JavaScript code in rules, okay? So if we go to the form that we're developing, and I have one queued up here, and on the plant view, I have a few rules. In this first rule, called new rule, which is a no-no, you can see that I have basically a JavaScript function. It's setting a bunch of variables. If we scroll down, it's got a loop in it, probably several loops, some other commands and things that we're doing. It's really doing a lot, and as you can see, it's quite a bit of code. Okay, so we don't want to do this. This makes maintenance of your rules down the road much more difficult. For example, you might have this same rule on several fields. Well, now you have to go to several fields, several different spots to make changes. And then another thing that I want to point out, for example, is if you have loops, if you need JavaScript and you have to use a loop, you can see that when you're going through and looping through, let's say, a repeating table, you're going to find that you have to have a little variable kind of in between your XPaths. So it breaks up your XPath, okay? So as you're looping through, it's using a variable to tell it which row you're on, okay? I'm not going to get into how all of that works, but the main thing to understand here is if I go try to find, for example, this field here, right, my plant field. So you see that the field is named f_plant. That's the same field that we're on here, as you can see over here. If I try to find this, because this little variable is in here, it's breaking up the XPath, it won't be found in where used. So if I right click, say where used, you see that it's found in 2 rules, okay? So I'm gonna hit cancel and just go back to my rules on plant and show you that there are 3 rules. So it's finding it in this rule. It's finding it in this rule because it's used in the condition, and that's easy. It's not finding it here because I don't have the same XPath because it's broken up by that variable for my loop. So the only way that I would be able to find this is by clicking in here, doing a Control F to see if it's used here. And I'd have to type in f_plant, and of course it finds it. The problem with that is if I have this rule in many different places, I now have to look in many different spots. So a better practice, as I talked about before, is if we just Control A to grab all of this, Control X, hit OK, come to our Solution tab and go to our JavaScript code console. This is where we really want to be putting this, okay? So we want to create a function. Let's just call it WebTips demo. Open and close brackets. Then we can throw all our code in there, okay? As you can see, we just double check to make sure we don't have any errors, okay? We'll grab the name that we just gave it, click OK, go back to our rule, and we get the same functionality by now just calling that in the rule. Okay. And then let's get in the habit of not leaving our rules named as new rule. You want to be as descriptive as you can, even if you use abbreviations, whatever you need to do, because as you go through and get more and more rules in your solution, you're going to want to be able to find those. And I can show you an example of why that's important as well. So before I do that, let's just finish up with this lesson. So now it's calling that, and then we can use that in rules on many different fields. So if this rule was on other fields, anytime we need to update that code, we simply have to go to one spot, update it here. And if I needed to search for a field to see if it's used in any JavaScript functions, again, that search is much easier when you do it here, because now I only have to do it once and I can find what I'm looking for. Okay. So that's why it's really important and beneficial to not put your JavaScript code, like all of this JavaScript code and rules. You should be putting it in the console and calling it from a function within the console. Okay, so skipping on to the next point, don't leave your rules with the name new rules. So when I do a where used on plant, for example, it's going to say, hey, this is used in a couple of rules. It's called new rule. Okay, well, maybe one of these rules is a problem and I want to check it. So I'm going to click f_plant, and you can see it takes me over here and it says, okay, here's all your rules for f_plant. Well, now they're all named new rules, so I don't know which one I was trying to look at or which one might be the problem, because these don't say what they should be doing. Now, if you wanted to, you could go to your form data tree, right click on my fields, do rules inspector, okay? And then you could search for, f_plant if you wanted to. So do a control F, f_plant. You see it's highlighted, and you can dig into the rule. And if you click the rule, it'll actually open the rule for you, which is a little bit better. But now I'm, away from my screen. I can't see my form. And as you can see, this is going to get real confusing after a while. All these rules are named new rule. It's not easy to figure out what I'm looking at. So it's just a best practice to be descriptive with your rules. It's going to make form maintenance much easier in the future, especially if it's a complex rule, okay? So what I recommend is, as you come into your rules, just describe exactly what they're doing. So for example, this rule is setting sales order for Eastern plants. Chances are you have similar rules, so be smart, use your copy and paste. Okay, good to go. So now this will make a lot more sense. And if I were to do where used, I see that like, oh, you know what, I'm having issues with sales org 2000, and here I know that's what that's setting. I can just go right to that rule, see it here, open it up, make whatever adjustments I need to make. Okay. Similarly, you don't want your groups to have names that are not going to make sense when you're trying to create rules. Okay. So sometimes you have to, do show hide on groups. You might want to hide a group or show it based on some condition. And it looks like our groups are named differently, right? But these are just labels. If I click on the group itself and I go to the properties, right, I'm seeing that it says request information, and that's what you want. If I come over here, it says material information, that's what you want. But it's very easy to just leave that name the same as what Winshuttle creates when you add a group, right? So you have to rename these things, otherwise it won't make as much sense. And I actually recommend using a prefix. So if I were to add a group here, because let's say on this particular view, I might also use my originator view as a revision view. So I need to add a different set of buttons. So I'm going to say no, this view, and you can see it just named it group 16. Now, what Winshuttle will do when you change your group name, for example, if I called this actions as well, it's probably going to rename that for me. So if I look at the properties, it's calling it actions, but it's going to let me name both of these group actions, which isn't very helpful to me when I go to try to create a show and hide rule. So for example, I might want to add some buttons here. I want to make sure I'm in the right group. Okay. Same thing goes for buttons. Anything that you might have to show, hide, do anything with, you want to kind of use a good naming convention. For me, I just say BT underscore. This is for the revisions. Okay. And then over here, I might just want to say cancel form. Okay. And then you set up your buttons to do whatever you need to do. But if I now need to put a rule on the form to show the appropriate group. So when it's a new request and I'm just submitting it for the first time, I want to show this group, this top group of actions. And then for revisions, I want to show the bottom group. Well, when I go to create a rule for doing that, and I typically do that on the task name, I can add a rule. Okay. I want that to run on form load because I'm showing and hiding something. It's an action. So anytime you first launch a form, if you're pulling in the task name into a field in your form, that task name will be blank. So I can just say when it's blank, show the originator. So then I have to put a couple of actions in here, and I want to change group display. I want to show actions. Well, as you can see, it's only coming up once. It's named the same. So we have to, so I'm going to have problems. It's going to cause trouble later on when I try to run these rules and I don't know which one I'm doing. So I'm going to cancel that. I'll hit OK here and just save that. We'll add something to it later. But what we want to do is make sure that when we're naming things here, we're doing it intelligently. I like to use a prefix. And then I like to say, okay, this is originator actions. And as you can see, I've renamed the group. Action stays the same. So it still says actions, and that's what I want. Then I'll come down here and I'll say group. Okay, so now that's named, and as you can see, it's still, the label is still actions. Okay, maybe I want to make that bold. So now, if I go back up to my task name where I was starting that rule, when I add my action, I say I want to change group display, I want to show, and then it's easy to get down to my groups right away. So I type in GRP, and now I can tell the difference. So I'll show originator actions, and then I'll hide revise actions. And then, of course, you want to make the inverse rule. When the opposite is true. Now I have two rules that are defined, have a good name. It's easy to understand what they're doing. So when I come back in here 6 months, 12 months down the road and I need to do something to the form, I can understand what these rules were meant to do. And then as you could see, as I created the rules, because I named my groups appropriately, it was easy to realize what they were, what those groups are for, and then I was able to select them. Okay, so that's really important thing to do. That'll really make maintenance easier down the road. Another thing I mentioned was form, like process status view and process completed form views. These are really meant to be read-only views, and we shouldn't be using anything or having anything on here that could potentially change the data in the form, right? So as you can see, I've left some controls at the top. My buttons are still here. And I have a task actually, or a request that's actually existing. So I'll just go back to my documents. And this is how you see processes in Evolve. So you can see I have this one that's kind of out there and running. And if I click on this, it's going to show me the process status view because it's still running. It's in review. That means it's running. So when I come out here, this is just what a user who's not necessarily a part of the process would see. And as you can see, I can potentially change data out here. I could change material number. I could accidentally delete something if I didn't mean to. And then I could submit the form or close the form. Now in Evolve, one nice thing is these buttons are disabled. It has that built-in functionality. I can tell you that in Foundation, there are versions in Foundation, if not all the versions in Foundation, where that's not true. If I had a button here that would hit approve, it would approve the form, move it on to the next step, and save these mistakes I've just made. Okay, so it's really important that we don't have buttons. We don't have any ability to edit on these status views, and that's something that I've seen people not do as developers. Okay, so you just want to make sure that we don't need these things. They might be on other views, so you only want to affect that view. So we just get rid of them. Okay, the form name only needs to be on the originator view. Okay, you can see I have an approver view where I don't have any of those things. On the process completed view, I'd also want to get rid of those things. Okay, same thing with the buttons. I don't need them. Just delete the whole group. They don't need to be there. Okay, and then you want to make sure your groups are read-only. Okay, so that's just the easy setting on each group where you click on the group header, come in and just say true, it's read-only. You can just make it that view. So then that's all read-only. And then just do the same thing for your process completed view. Okay, and then if we were to deploy this, and launch form, so now I have a process that's running. Okay, you can see there's my new process. So if I, from the documents, click on it, I should see the process status view. So when I click, as you can see now, everything is disabled. I can't change anything. And there's no buttons other than just a cancel button. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure everybody could see and understand that. And then lastly, another thing that we want to try to avoid as developers is that we don't want to build these spider webs as I talked about. We want to build workflows. Okay, so you can have a workflow and you start throwing nodes on here and you know which way you want to go, but then by the time you're done, I've seen too many times where we have lines crossing and things are all over the place. You really want to have your workflow be something that's easy to follow. Okay, so maybe we come down here, we move some things around so that it's a little bit more clear. Maybe we even have this up here. You can slide some things over. You know, we don't want lines crossing if we can avoid it. And sometimes that's going to require some planning, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But really, we just want these things to, you know, make a lot more sense, be a little bit more clear, so that we're not, you know, dealing with all these things crossing over each other and, you know, being hard to read and understand. So, you know, we can do things about that, right? Just kind of clean things up, plan things. You use 90 degrees, 90-degree angle transitions. It really kind of helps, you know, make things a little bit more clear. Okay. Another thing is, you see how that would overlap if I tried to do it like that. You know, if you can't use 90, you know, you can use a little bit of an angle there, make things a little bit more easier to follow. The other thing too is if you start getting your conditions overlapping, there is a feature here where we can use a label instead. So I can make that a little bit shorter, you know, things like that. So here, if you know, that one was kind of in the way, okay, it makes it a little bit smaller. Okay, here you can see that it's overlapping and I don't want to stretch this out. You know, we have a decision note here that says request rejected. Well, in this case it is, so I can just say yes here. Okay, just kind of things that clean up your workflows and make them easier to read, because that's really what you want to have. And again, like I said, sometimes you'll have a complex workflow and it might require a little bit more planning. And that's when you use a tool like Visio and you start planning out how you want your workflow to flow so that you have nice 90-degree angles and, you know, ORs and things like that where you need them, so that it is easy to follow and easy to understand, and you don't end up with this spider web of lines crossing one another and you can't even understand what the workflow is doing. Okay, so that was really all I had today. I hope that was helpful and made your development a little bit better and maintenance down the road easier to manage. If you do have any questions or you want to reach out to Clear Process Solutions, here are the ways you can do that. And again, if you want to subscribe to WebTips, you can do that through our website. Thanks everybody for your time and have a great day.